Hello and welcome. You're with EastMojo Live and I'm Karma Paljor. Over the past 3 months, we've lost count of how many people have visited Manipur with the sole purpose of fact-finding, almost as if admitting that whether the local journalist reports neither give us facts nor information worth finding out. From political parties to civil society organizations, almost everyone has Manipur on their mind. The most recent among these organizations was the Editors Guild of India, which admittedly was requested by the Indian Army, alleging that the media outlets were indulging in outright misrepresentation of facts. However, the EGI report has caused severe outrage, especially in Imphal. The Manipur government, in what has now become a typical move on all criticism, took strong exception to the report and filed an FIR against the authors, while the All Working Journalists Association and Editors Guild of Manipur have also issued strong rebuttals. Joining me to discuss this topic, burning topic I should say right now, in the studio are Dhiren Sadukpam, one of the most fearless journalists from Manipur and the founder editor of Frontier Manipur. Also joining me, Dr. Jilingamba Yenkom, a professor at the Tata Institute of Social Sciences, Guwahati, and also Amit Kumar, our EastMojo executive editor. We'll also try and connect with Patricia Mukim, editor-in-chief of the Shillong Times, later on the phone line as she is traveling. So thank you all if you've joined us right now. Thank you to my guests for joining in. First to you, Dhiren, immediately when you saw this report from the Editors Guild, what was the first thing that you thought about?
Karma, see, I had lots of hope, In fact, one of the members who visited the in Manipur, and I wasn't in Manipur during that time. I had gone outside for some work, and so I was unable to meet them, in fact. But one of the members had contacted me and said they would like to meet me and all that. And I told them honestly that I will be out of station, so they could meet up with our executive editor, Paujal Chauba, and also discuss things out with them. And also they made it very clear that they would be speaking to cross sections of society and civil society organizations, media representatives, and journalists, senior journalists, and primarily almost everyone that represented so-called the news media and in the Imphal Valley, to be very precise, or maybe the whole of Manipur. And they also said they would go to the hills, but primarily in the Kuki-dominated areas, where they also have little pockets of their own spheres of influence, media spheres of influence. And I was having lots of hope that they would be giving some kind of a report under which there would be, some kind of a sensible report. But then when I first read and also found out, the first thing, the glaring example I gave you is the kind of a factual errors that they commit, So I think there were lots of factual error. One of them, I think, is about identifying one particular, the forest office, which was identified as one of the cookie houses. That I know, but I think based on that also somebody had also filed an FIR against the Editor Guilds of India. That is the kind of a thing. But then and I thought that is it, and I also immediately realized that it was a mistake that they created. But having said this, when you go through the reports, you also find glaring examples of factual errors, and including very serious kind of issues with that. And another thing is, like, out at the outset, forget, I know I don't expect some kind of a what you call methodology, like we do in social sciences, or maybe some kind of research methodology while trying to write a so-called fact-finding report, and they have to be rooted to the kind of information that you get it. The first glaring thing, kind of a example of where I think this factual report would not become would lose its credibility, is the way we normatively, those of us who grew up with the kind of a conventional ethics of journalism, the attribution, if you actually check through all this, all the kind of reports from whom they spoke to, they said they have met a cross section of people, like the journalists, then civil society organizations, the media representatives, and all that, and they said that they are not having any terms of reference for actually this fact-finding team, and also they refused to say. They in fact admitted that they will not be going into the what you call the genesis of the problem. But if you read the statement, the first kind of a thing, half of this report were actually laying the foundation, or so-called setting their own terms of reference, as well as also drawing certain kind of a conclusion, which I think is too immature to do that. And number one, I said the absence of attributions. I mean, whom have they spoken? They should have named people, to be very honest, who are the journalists that they spoke to, and from where did they gather all the information. So the number one is the absence of attributions, from where you're actually gathering the information, and it's when you actually, both for research as well as for journalistic purpose, when you go there to the field, and it's mandatory actually, we are in the conventional sense to actually attribute this thing to people, so attribution is one thing, and second is about first in the outset you said that we will not be having terms of reference, and also not going to the genesis of it, but then while trying to lay the foundation of their report, I think they have already taken some kind of a stand which they think is the right one.
And a lot of people are also talking about the time taken now. A week or 4 days might not be really enough to really understand conflict situation on the ground, which is gone on for a few months altogether. Let me get I shouldn't use the word, but kind of an outsider's view. Dr. Yankom, who's a social scientist, is here with us in the studio. You have gone through that report in detail. As a person who's a keen media watcher, reads a lot from the media, what were your takeaways, and what were you unhappy about in the Editors Guild report?
Yeah, thanks, Karma. One is the point about factual inaccurate factual details that's already been highlighted. So for a fact-finding report from journalists to find such glaring mistakes is, I think, the first point that we need to talk about. So we don't quite know how they were in fact allowing themselves to talk of such glaring mistakes in the report, in the final published report, right? And there are many glaring mistakes, some of which are minor, some of which are actually very, very serious mistakes. So I think that's the first point that we need to keep in mind. The second one I would say is the sense of entitlement with which they judge their own colleagues, the journalists in Manipur. Right? They're passing judgments on their own colleagues that these are incompetent people, that these are people who, and they in fact, of course, within quotation, they even say that the journalists of Manipur are taking dictation from the chief minister of Manipur. That's I think that's unacceptable to say of your own colleagues, right? So it's this attitudinal problem, I would say, which is really a problem. And my sense is that this comes from a sense of thinking that they are superior insofar as their relationship to the people, and including the journalists in the Northeast, are concerned, that as though they can see certain kinds of facts and truths, whereas people in the Northeast in general, and Manipur in particular, cannot see these facts, right? And I think that attitudinal problem, which used to exist during the colonial period, still is carried over, unfortunately, by the journalists in India. And linked with that is the way in which you can then dismiss everyone in Manipur, especially in this conflict, by merely identifying with their own ethnicity. So it doesn't matter what kind of ideology you have. It doesn't matter whether you are an activist or a journalist or a women's rights activist, an academic, an intellectual. Everything, all of that identities that one carries is now reduced to only one identity, which is that of one's ethnicity. So they can call all these media persons in Manipur who are working, in under very, very difficult circumstances as Meitei journalists, Meitei media, right? As though their other their other identities do not matter anymore. They must be reduced to only their singular identity. And if one does the same, India faces Hindu-Muslim riots all the time. So if one does the same kind of a logical extension of this that they have done, are we then to say that every Hindu journalist in India must speak for only Hindu position, and every Muslim journalist in India can only speak for their Muslim brethren? Is that the conclusion we are supposed to draw? Because in the context of Manipur, that's what they have drawn, that everyone can only speak for only their ethnic identity. That is the, I think, unfortunate part.
Right. So a key takeaway from what you're saying, Doctor, is that that you are talking to journalists who've been on the ground, who've been reporting, from the ground, violence, yes, and you've completely said that okay, you are just reporting, and you are, say, a Meitei journalist. Dhiren, it's not like mistakes have not been made. Factual errors have been made. By many. It's been very tough for all of us who've been reporting from Manipur to really confirm from the ground whether it's a factor. There is no internet connection, so that has been the challenge, isn't it? But
yes.
Just by saying okay, you only reported for the Meiteis, hurt you as a journalist?
I think you're absolutely right, and I think Jila has already laid the foundation for this discussion. I think while trying to the kind of what you call the approach of the Editors Guild of India report is precisely, if you deeply read into it and do a kind of a textual analysis of it, is as though if you identify the profession like we profess, the journalism or kind of being a journalist, if you start identifying with your own identity or ethnic identity or religious identity, like for instance, there would if you draw a similar kind of a parallel conclusion, is like all the Hindu journalists are supposed to be
Hindus.
For Hindus, all the Muslim journalists are supposed to be full time for the Muslims. So that kind of a attitude, as what you call Dr. Jila had informed, that kind of attitudinal kind of a attitude that they are showing, I think it showcases certain lack of perspective. And but what I'm scared is actually, if you go to the three individuals that had been to Manipur, editors, actually they're all senior editors who have understood, we assume who have understood the country, the vast nation that is India, and the kind of a diversity that we have, But if you check the overall, and I'm not asking, or I'm not doubting the kind of a credibility of each one of them, okay? For instance, you have Bharat Bhushan, who is who have reported from the Northeast for for many years, who have reported particularly in insurgency and other things, and many other, the other two senior journalists and all. They are all part of the. So you expect a lot from them, actually, So sometimes I begin thinking that when you expect a lot from them, and when they are unable to deliver the kind of expectations, so maybe I'm asking for more, but I think that is a kind of a and you should draw the conclusion, It's
But
like
very quickly, isn't it true that the media was deeply divided along racial lines when it came to reporting? Because there were a lot of comments coming saying that the cookie reporters, the stories that they were filing were never published.
No, Karma, see, I'll come to that. And also, see, elsewhere I have been talking about when I first came to Guwahati, to deliver some kind of a lecture here organized by some organizations here. I had already mentioned, in fact, they were asking what are the difficulties that reporters, particularly from Imphal-based reporters, faced, or maybe in general reporters or journalists in general faced in a state like that, and also in the conflict of this magnitude. Okay, so I said, number one, see, because of the character of the conflict that we see today, because it's already ethnicized conflict, and also there has been gross what you call weaponization of what I call the primordial instincts, weaponization of the primordial instincts. So when that kind of a magnitude of this, a violence of this magnitude happen, is very difficult, for instance, for the Imphal based media or Imphal Valley. For instance, I'm not from Imphal, I stay in Bishnupur area, which is again the hotbed, for us to actually move around or maybe climb hills, as you say, climb hills or go to the Kuki dominated areas to actually report, and also similarly the difficulties that the so-called journalists in the Kuki areas also, they also face a similar kind of problem. They can't come down to actually get our views. So in that sense, you are left with some kind of, and by the way, this is not excuse. I think they themselves, these people who had come, members of the Editors Guild of India, they must have themselves experienced this kind of a thing. So if you have to cross over to Sujanpur, Amit, you also know you also know exactly what I'm talking of. If you have to cross over to Sujanpur, you need separate kind of a vehicle, driven by a of a persons of that hails from a different community, to that level of thing is there. So under such kind of circumstances, it's very difficult, for instance, the mighty journalists to actually venture out into the hills and try to get. In fact, Frontier Manipur, we actually tried. I think Amit knows very well that our executive editor had gone, and that also under the supposed to be, they were supposed to be provided security by the so-called security forces by the army, but despite that they were not allowed to actually cover the women's demonstration that happened in some Kuki dominated areas. So these facts and all, I think even the Editors Guild of Manipur as well as the All Manipur Working Journalists Union had already put across to them, I think, and it found no mention, even the effort that we give were found no mention in the in the whole report. So the report seems a bit, I think, even EGM as well as the AMJU, they're kind of the rebuttal, I think, is okay, but their rebuttal may not be holistic in the sense, it might not have given the kind of hard-hitting analysis like Jilla or Dr. Jilla does, but it also speaks volumes about certain kind of a shoddy approach, despite their own experiences, kind of a shoddy approach, and that actually, in fact, it adds fuel to the fire. That's the kind of thing that we should be careful of. It doesn't help anyone. It will not help the Kukis, neither would it help the Maitis, So in fact, we are, it's kind of literally pushing down into the spirals of conflict, it further deepens the conflict. By saying this, I'm not trying to echo what Chief Minister Biren has said. In fact, everybody knows it's quite ridiculous, sometimes when certain viewpoints, there are similarity of viewpoints are there, but but that way, I think, I don't know, I feel that the report by the Editors Guild of India, I think, is far short of the kind of expectation that I would,
Certainly, because a lot of people, especially us journalists, were expecting the Editors Guild of India, to come with a report that has a certain kind of weight, that makes us understand. And I'll bring Amit, because Amit has been arguing with me, since morning about the report and pointing out where the gaps are. Amit, very quickly, you've gone through the report not once. I think you've read it like 3 or 4 times. Just quickly take us through the gaps, and then I'll take the discussion forward.
Thank you, Karma. I remember discussing this with you on Saturday, and when we were doing the story, the first thing that I realized is, as the Editors Guild of India, you are not there to tell me what has happened in Manipur. That we are getting stories, and this, let's not beat around the bush. The amount of documentation on what has happened in Manipur is substantial by now, no matter which level you look at, from international to right local. So an Editors Guild which says that our mandate is not to explain, to establish what has caused it, and then spending 13 pages on that. First and foremost, my reaction was like, get to the point. You are the Editors Guild. You are pretty much the only organization, and I cannot stress this enough. You are pretty much the only organization that is the voice of journalists. You are the Editors Guild of India, but there are no editors without reporters. And you are supposed to speak for the reporters, the kind of challenges that you're facing. Like, there is no mention of how many hours the reporters were putting in, the kind of troubles that they had to go in, the kind of the kind of stress that they are dealing with, the kind of psychological and that kind of stuff. Like these are journalists who will suffer with PTSD. Like we often joke that Chauba is the kind of reporter who will pick up a camera and go. But that guy has been on the front line, literally on the front line for 3 months now, working for, let's not beat around, he's working for peanuts. The Editors Guild does not tell me anything about what the journalists are going through. On one hand, you say that, oh, the journalists are, and that's what I'm saying. That is where, and again, I have to remind everybody, I'm a mainlander. So my work, when I came here to work, my work was not to start explaining what has already been explained. My work here is not to explain things in a way that is others are already doing. My work is here to simply amplify the voices here. The Editors Guild did not do a great job, in my opinion, of explaining the treacherous conditions in which you are working, because if you are saying that journalists are facing trouble, hello, everybody knows that. Look at the conditions in which people are reporting, and especially the local journalists. I was hoping that they would talk about the kind of pressure that the journalists are dealing with, the kind of, I'm pretty sure so many journalists are facing delayed salary, some of them may not have got any money. Instead of talking that, you once again did the same thing where you tried to make it oh, the government. I can bet a house that I don't own that no matter which government would have been in power, a Congress, BJP, bring Aam Aadmi Party and Kejriwal in Manipur, and he would have implemented internet ban within 24 hours. He would have done exactly what the government is doing right now, because there is no other way. Dhiren has explained this much better. The problem of the level of militarization that has been brought into Manipur, what is the state government capable of doing against that kind of power? And instead of explaining the problems of the reporters, you again made it a report about, oh, the government was inefficient. There is not a single person who will say the government has dealt with it efficiently. In fact, that is one thing that probably the only thing that Mehteis and Cookies agree with. But, and last point, I'm just saying that when you say Imphal media became Mehtei media, that even though I'm not Imphal based or Mehtei based or a Mehtei, I take gross offense to that. The reason why I'm saying is because the kind of work Dhiren Sadokpam does under Frontier Manipur with 2 people running an organization is not the same as the kind of narrative that is peddled by a Nishikant Sapam whose declared assets is 150 crore rupees and is the owner of a newspaper. When you say that Imphal media became Mehtei media, you are saying that the kind of work that Paujal Chauba is doing is no different from Imphal Free Press, which is no different from People's Chronicle, which is no different from Shanghai Express. That is as offensive as if I had told all of them that the work that Ravish Kumar is doing is no different from Arnab Goswami, because both of them are mainlanders and because both of them do Hindi media. That kind
as good as that.
As good as that. And I'm sorry, but that is not acceptable. You cannot have this kind of irresponsibility coming from people from whom much
expectations.
This is coming out from a political party which is out there to target BJP, file well and dandy, go ahead.
Right.
But Editors Guild of India is not speaking for journalists. It's there to explain situation which has already been explained, and that's why I take offense to the kind of work that they have done. It is not correct, and you did not represent journalists, which was your main work.
Right. And now I come to, one of the strangest things that I read in this report. It says that while the Editors Guild of India team met a cross-section of print, both English and vernacular, digital TV and cable TV news media representatives, it was handicapped in terms of not being able to read the local language news platforms or go through the archives of cable TV and TV news which were not available. I'll bring in Dr. Dilang here. This is the basic. They should have taken help. They should have also read what the vernacular media was writing.
Absolutely. I think this is the kind of attitudinal mindset that I was talking about. This sense of entitlement that I mentioned, which is that as Delhi-based individuals and with a long history of being in the field of media, I think they feel a sense of entitlement that they can just go to any place and write about these places, even if they know very little. Some of them may know a little more than the others in the team, but even if you don't know the language, even if you have absolutely no idea, you don't feel the need to incorporate some of your colleagues who are working in the ground and as we have heard, working in the ground under very, very difficult conditions, right? And instead what you end up doing is you brush aside as though knowing or incorporating someone to do as a collective is unnecessary. and instead you pass judgments, right? You pass these absolutely sort of absolute judgments on which community is saying what, and which community is doing what, and so on and so forth, and at the end, what what they have managed to produce is a narrative of looking at one community as a victim and projecting the other community as the villain, right? And I would imagine that if you are non-partisan, and which is what the Editors Guild claims to be, then this would not be a very good step to take in order to bring about peace in Manipur. So the question that I have in my mind now is, are they working with some interest in mind? And that's a big question I think we must ask the Editors Guild of India, that in whose interest are they working now, right? And I ask this question also because I've learned that in order to carry out this fact-finding report, apparently they did a crowdfunding, right?
Yeah.
And I'm not quite sure that's the best way to go about doing a fact-finding for the kind of work that they wanted to do, because if some groups or individuals were willing to pay them, does it mean that they were ready to sacrifice this non-partisanship in order to speak the interest of that individual or organization? So I think there is a big question that we need to ask, and because it would have ramifications if we want to bring about peace in Manipur, right? So whose interests are they serving by this report is something that we have to ask.
Right. Whether this will further, make things difficult on the ground is something my panelists have already said. I'm going to take a few questions which are coming in the live feed. There's a gentleman, I think, who wants to know, can you list down all those factual errors, that you talked about very quickly? What are the glaring factual errors?
Dr. Jila would be a better person because he's gone through the report more extensively. But in fact, when he was saying it to that commenter, I'll say we will do a separate episode on this because the report is out. I think we should do that. I think the readers also deserve that.
Jill has gone through it quite minutely.
No, just to give you a few
examples,
glaring examples. At the very beginning, they mention one act called Hill Areas Committee Act of 1972. I don't know whether this act exists or not. In my knowledge, and I have tried to look up this, it doesn't exist. Right? What is this Hill Areas Committee Act of 1972, which seems to be very, very crucial according to their report, which is mentioned, but the act doesn't exist. First glaring sort of the mistake that they have made. There are also a lot of others. For instance, one of the news organizations that they cite is the Frontier Express. Right? I don't know of any news organization called the Frontier Express that exists in Manipur. I think, in my knowledge, I think it doesn't exist. They also mention one officer, an IPS officer called Brinda Thongnaugjam. I don't know of any IPS officer by that name. So, if they were referring to another officer, police officer, Brinda Thongnaugjam, then she is an MPS officer. So these, just small, some of them are silly mistakes. Some of them are very, very, I think mistakes with a lot of ramifications, right? So that's, and you can go through. It's a long report, and you can go through many of those mistakes, factual mistakes.
Right.
The other is, I think, at a more sinister level, I would put. I'm sorry to use the word, but I would say that it's at a more sinister level precisely because of the way in which the report is framed, right? The way in which they question the role of the Mairapaibis, for instance, right? I would say that is at a deeper level, that they have questioned some of the groups and organizations, whereas they have taken verbatim some of the allegations by other actors and organizations who are party to the conflict, right? So rather than trying to give a holistic picture of the condition under which their colleagues in Manipur are working and have been working and have faced consequences for that, they have, I think, through this report, they have passed quick judgments on individuals and organizations and the entire media fraternity of Manipur. I think that's the unfortunate part we are talking about.
Right. Now, these are details. I have a comment saying you don't know who Brinda is, referring to what doctor said. IPS, there is a difference between the Indian Police Service and the Manipur Police Service. So, she's not a IPS
She's not
officer.
an
She's not an IPS. Yeah.
She's a
MPCS.
MPCS officer, is the detailing that doctors doing. Maybe we could stay away from these tiny mistakes and call it tiny mistakes and give them the benefit of doubt that they didn't have time.
No, Karma, I would
remember
Karma,
this was crowd funded. They didn't have the time. We can give them the benefit of the doubt. But once again, there is a bigger question which emerges from the kind of discussion that is going on in our life right now. It has again become about Kuki versus Meitei. This has, I think, at this point at least, when I look at it, or when we as editors and journalists are talking, this is again about them versus
Somebody
us,
else.
or us versus them.
Please,
It's again
yeah,
become
this is-
that.
yeah.
But this has not really helped the media to really do a in-depth self-analysis of the mistakes that we've made and how we could have reported it better, following the guidelines. I mean, and the guidelines are wonderful, which are set by the Editors Guild. And if we just follow the guidelines, we will be a better journalist and we will be a better journalistic organization. You were saying, Gideon.
Exactly. That is what I'm saying, because if you actually go into it and what are the factual mistakes and what are the factual errors, I mean, if you go, and I think the All Manipur Working Journalists Union as well as the Editor Guilds of Manipur had given a rebuttal. I think they also had, list of 27 points, in fact, 27 points, and I don't want to go through all of them, because the moment you go through all of them again, as Ahmed had already mentioned, some of them are glaring examples, and I think if any of the audience here would like to go through them, I think go through them. I think there are enough sources where you can get the rebuttal. In fact, the Frontier Manipur had also published their rebuttal. Okay, so you can go through them. But I'm not saying that whatever they are saying is the ultimate truth and all that kind of thing.
But there is no ultimate
but
truth.
there is nothing called ultimate truth. Everything is relative in the sense. But then again, my basic thing is, the Editors Guild of India, I mean, EGI's report, again pigeonholes the two community into the same kind of a binary,
exactly.
wherever it doesn't help anyone. It doesn't help the Meiteis, nor does it help the Cookies. In fact, it adds fuel to the fire. In fact, this is going to be, I mean sometimes this can be treated as a bigger issues and bigger problem.
That's where I think I'll add just one point, that what I expected the Editors Guild of India is to advocate for Meitei and Kuki journalists. That is the one thing that I wanted them to do. You did not do that. You made it more about yourself. And let me add one more thing regarding the fact that the point that we had mentioned, that about the language. It will never happen, and again, sorry if I'm making it more about mainland versus, but I'm saying it will never happen in mainland that you will have a fact-finding team which will not speak Hindi. Or which will not go to Maharashtra to do a fact-finding report and not understand a word of Marathi.
Yeah.
That is also, even then I would say that it for a person who speaks only Hindi and does not know Marathi, it's a little easier to get sense of what they are saying. But here, if you don't understand the language, and you cannot say that, oh, we spoke to people, but since we don't speak that language, that media is not our concern, because you forget how powerful local media is. You forget how much a Mami TV report in Meitei language, for example, even during lockdown, you would see 500,000 views in half a day. So when you say that reports are causing law and order situation, it is these reports more than the English media report, which you read while having a cup of coffee. And mainland media might be doing great, and mainland media has done great stories. But the thing is, the reason they have been able to do those great stories is because they don't stay back to pay the consequences of this. Chauba, for example, and I'm repeating his name because he's genuinely the kind of person, and anybody who thinks Paujal Chauba would do government's bidding clearly does not understand how Frontier Manipur works, because when you did not even know about the problems in Manipur, these people were in jail, lockup, sorry, not jail, lockup, but because of the work that they were doing. So they have always spoken for the people, they have always had troubles with the government for precisely standing up for the people. So when that reporter stands on the ground and just tells what is happening, he is speaking in Meitei, for example, because that is his audience. If you don't understand what he is saying, you are looking at him as another Meitei media. That is where my problem lies, that when you don't listen to what people are speaking in the local language, you think everybody who is from a particular ethnicity is doing exactly the same thing, and that is something that is not right. And that is, I guess, Editors Guild of India is not some random organization. When you are that level of an organization and you are saying you have 60 years of collective experience, it's like, sorry for if this is not the right example, but if you go to a 5-star hotel, you don't expect the plate to be slightly dirty, or somebody
Right.
just ate in it and washed it. You were supposed to do that, and you did not talk about the journalists, the conditions. You sort of acknowledge that they are in trouble, but you have nothing to offer to them.
So let's
Karma, before Amit ends, can I add a few things?
Yeah.
I mean, you see, okay, glaring examples of errors and one thing, and which Amit had, pointed out. This is another issue which I think is very, very serious. Amit had rightly pointed out. One issue which I wanted to, maybe it's more of an expectation. I right at the outset, I said I expected a lot, and perhaps maybe I was trying to compare with some other reports, But if you go through the kind of a fact-finding report, which I think the 4 women have done,
Exactly.
precisely, Angela Rangat from Meghalaya, Said Hamida, who was former, I think with the Planning Commission, she was there, and also
Fantastic
the
report.
Rashmi Goswami, and I think
Jarjum.
Jarjum
Mehte from
Mehte.
Yeah.
If you have ever read the kind of factual, the kind of a fact-finding team that this 4 women have done is absolutely brilliant, and they did not venture into something which they didn't understand either. One of them spoke to me, almost for 2 hours, and I spoke about, because I try to locate the kind of a current situation into the geopolitical reasoning that India has, and also how there things are going to be rolled out of New Delhi, okay, without even any people from the northeast without knowing it. So they couldn't understand few things that certain concepts that I had used. So they didn't venture into it. In fact, which they didn't understand, which is understandable. They were that honest, when bringing it, and when they brought out a report, it was accepted by both the communities, and people in fact praised them. I think from what the warring faction, warring
I would just
sides.
add the report was so good the Manipur government did not file an FIR.
Exactly.
So, the report was so good that nobody took offense, nobody bothered to file
Exactly, and I was expecting that kind of a report.
an FIR. Exactly.
So let's now change tracks a little bit and get into the constructive mood. We've looked at the report. The reason all of us are here, and most of us independent voices, are to really look at the report in a very unbiased manner and really understand what was needed to be done. From here on, I'd just like to take a constructive look at what could have been done by the report. Dr. Zilinga, what could have been done? What would have helped, and how would it have helped journalists who are on the ground?
Yeah, I think if, and I presume that they want peace to come to Manipur, that I believe that members of the Editors Guild of India and the ones who went to Manipur are also for peace. So if you want peace, then I think the first thing to do is to give a sense of empathy to the people who are suffering. And I think the reason why we all agree, and many other people have also agreed, that the report by these 4 women is so good and so touching, is because they come from a sense of empathy with the people who are suffering in Manipur, and there's no doubt that people have been suffering for a very long time, right? So one would have imagined that with the kind of experience these journalists have had, they would come from that perspective, that how do we go forward from here, and if you come with a sense of empathy, you come to understand the suffering of the people, including that of the journalist in Manipur, I think that would have been the first positive step. So you're here to learn, you're here to listen, not to pass judgments, right? And I think that is a very, very important initiative for peace builders who are not necessarily tuned into the to the nitty-gritties of the conflict, and when we're trying to be non-partisan, that you have to listen to the voices, and in your report you put out what you have listened, rather than this community was right, that community was wrong, that kind of an initiative. And I just want to add one more here, and a point that Amit has already flagged off earlier. It may be coincidence, I'm not quite sure, but what I have noticed is you look at the contrast that we have already drawn between the early sort of this women's group that went and the Editors Guild of India. 3 of those women are from the Northeast, right? So probably they understand the situation better.
They do.
You look at the initiatives which have come from the eminent personalities in Assam, trying to be non-partisan, intervene and bring about peace in Manipur. You look at the initiative from Nagaland, church organizations, as well as the NFR, Naga Forum for Reconciliation,
Forum for Reconciliation.
Naga Reconciliation, FNR. So if you look at their initiative, they come without self-interest. They come because they genuinely want peace to come back in Manipur.
They have been there in some situation or the other.
And I'm not quite sure whether that's the position from which some of the organizations, based out of Delhi, for lack of a better word, have come to the region. So I would in fact wish that your organization and various other organizations, both media as well as civil society organizations in the region, if they take more initiative, a leading role, rather than allowing these New Delhi organizations to dictate terms, I think that would be a positive step.
Right. Dhiren, what would you have liked to see in the report?
Apart from mistakes.
See, right from the beginning, I've been telling, I've been speaking about, I think such kind of a fact-finding report, I think is good enough to set certain frame of references, and frame of references could be, as Jila had, rightly mentioned, if Jila had already rightly mentioned, it could be based on some kind of building up an empathy, kind of a processing kind of thing, so that if you do not understand the kind of hardships, the kind of emotional distraught, the kind of emotional thing that everybody is facing, and so I keep on saying that when two communities, their primordial instincts are weaponized to this level, so I said the magnitude of the conflict is this high. I think it's not good enough to have some kind of agenda behind. So I suspect there's some kind of agenda behind, and that agenda is not necessarily like see, for instance, there is always some kind of assumptions also with the Indian media that most of the Indian media, what Arnab Goswami would rightly call the Lutyens media and all that kind of thing, some kind of assumption that, right of the center kind of a positioning that you are in fact taking. I think it should also have a kind of a penetrative gaze. When I say penetrative gaze, is literally into the kind of a issue, and also fill the core of the fill the core of the issue, and also if you have a little bit of empathy, I think it could have been easily worked out. So I think in sense they should have done good homework, and also have, as I said, number one, attribute to whatever whatever they have, the kind of conclusions or the kind of observations that they have drawn.
Right.
It would have been really, really good and credible if they had in fact attributed many of these comments that they randomly make,
Right.
without even out of context sometimes. For instance, the forest kind of a law that they were inferring to, okay?
Right.
They were
Protected
referring
area,
to
that's
protected
reserve,
area, reserve, and
forest.
all that kind of thing. See, in fact, I think even the Amju, Amju as well as they had given a kind of a thing in the rebuttal also, that the dismantling of the residents began not necessarily with the Nagas or the Kukis. It began with the Meiteis within the Pangals and the Meiteis in the valley, okay?
Yeah.
And that is
Removing
one
of
place.
the-
That is one place where they actually have data, and that is
and
something that has been repeated
it
time
has been
again.
totally silent. They have been totally, the editor EGI report had been totally silent on that.
It's in
You know,
the
it's
second
in
page.
the
Yeah,
second
I think
page
it's
or
page number
something, you know,
point number
says, yeah.
16 or
Third.
something.
And in,
Yeah,
in fact,
third.
Meiteis are the
They were the first thing that had
first
been
and
evicted
also,
who had
more
encroached
numbers
upon.
of Meitei
Yeah.
houses were demolished.
So 148 Meitei houses, and this is the joint press release of the All Manipur Working Journalists Union and the Editors Guild of Manipur. Here they say that it stated that these declarations were meant to evict Kuki villages, but records of eviction by the government available with the Manipur Forest Department show otherwise. Now again here they are giving details. So even the rebuttal is just talking so much about the report other than journalistic work, which should have been
Exactly.
critiqued more. Is
is, yeah.
what the editors and our doctor here are talking about. I'm getting very interesting comments from a person called Gogu Sithau, and he's been engaging with us right from the start. There is a point where he says that, I want to take this point, let's all agree that there are some factual errors as per their complaint. In the report there are some factual errors. What about the major parts of the report? And I'll take this question to Doctor. What about the major parts of the report? Do you really agree that the rest of the report is true?
No. No, I think, and it's not about
True or false.
True or
Yeah.
false,
Why?
exactly.
Ah.
But what as I mentioned earlier, I think for me, if you want to bring about peace in Manipur, which I'm assuming all of us want peace to come to Manipur, then the people who are coming from New Delhi and other places should come to listen to the suffering of the people. And I'm repeating myself here, but I think that's the most significant act one can do if you're coming from outside the state, right? Try and listen to the suffering of the people, and people have suffered tremendously. It's not just Meitei suffering, Kuki suffering. Even the communities who are not who are not directly in this conflict, they have also suffered. So try and understand that suffering first. Talk to the common people, and from there, try and think of what should we do to be able to bring about peace. And I think if you come from that position, then it will bring about a positive step to what we envision in the future. But I think the report doesn't do that. I think the report doesn't even intend or pretend to do that. What the report does is that they already feel that there has been a bias in the way the media, the Imphal-based media, what they have called the Meitei media, which is, I think, problematic. The Imphal-based media have, in their understanding, they have played a partisan role. So they have come here to pass a judgment on the media fraternity of Manipur.
Right.
And that's what the report does. That's why I have said that I disagree in entirety. The report cannot be, it's not just factual details, it's the way in which the report is framed, it's the intention of the report that I'm questioning. And in that sense, I'm using a very strong word, that perhaps they have some kind of an interest which is driving them to come to this conclusion.
Right. Sanayama is saying, what's the point in inviting Meitei panelists? Now I'm going to reply to you, Sanayama. This is again not about Meitei or Kuki. The Editors Guild report has been scathing on Imphal journalists, and they've kind of painted them as Meitei journalists. Therefore, we have one of the most fiercely independent editors of Frontier Manipur, who has even faced lockup time, who's been detained here to speak on what he thinks, whether the report has been fair to all journalists across. All journalists cannot be painted with the same brush. We have a well-known social scientist who has been very independent, very vocal in his voice for peace. In fact, he with some of his Kuki friends have even started a small movement, to bring peace. So that is the way to move forward, to kind of a constructive way to move forward. It's like building an architecture for the future, because right now our house is in a terrible condition, and more argument will only destroy it further. So there is a need to build. So the reason we are talking, all of us here, all independent voices, is that we feel the need to build. Amit, to you now, in terms of the need to build, it's kind of established here when we are talking that this report does not build. It shows the flaws and then leaves it at that.
No, in fact,
What could it have done more?
So that's what, and especially responding to the comment that the person made, why invite Meitei journalists? That's the thing. See, it's you who's seeing the person as a Meitei and a first and the journalist second. And I cannot repeat this enough. Just go search for the Frontier Manipur. The website's domain address comes later. The arrest of the editor-in-chief and the executive editor comes before. And this is 2-3 years before the current violence. So these are not people who have been working with or for the government. In fact, far from it. When you paint this person as a Meitei journalist, all you are seeing is that because this person is from a certain community, they are absolutely incapable of doing journalism. That is where we object. And that is where something, just to add to what Karma was saying, that is where I think the EGI has made a big mistake. When you have listed out the channels, saying that, oh, these are the people who, these are the channels of the Meitei, these are the Meitei channels. See, let's not forget one thing, conflict, and I think Karma is far better adept at speaking at this than me, because he's been a journalist for far longer. Things like community clashes, communal clashes for that matter, ethnic violence, violence of this scale for this long. Every journalist is not, we are not necessarily trained to, work in these places or in these circumstances, in these challenging circumstances. A lot of the reporters that you are seeing, whether it is from a place like Mami TV or ISTV or even like Frontier Manipur or Imphal Free Press or even the Cookie reporters for that matter, before May 3, for all you know, they were just handling day-to-day regular stories, right? Like we are not, everybody is not here like, oh, conflict, okay, these are the guidelines that I must follow. The Red Cross has issued this, the Journalists Without Borders has said this, okay, this is how these are the frameworks we will work on. Oh, we have prepared a toolkit to work without internet connections. How do we make sure our reports are correct? That is the question that I wanted EGI to raise, that these journalists are not trained well. They are not, EGI has not imparted lessons. Have you done capacity building with these reporters in the past? In all this while between May 3rd and today, did you try to talk to them about what are the kind of problems they are facing? I will tell you that I had reporters who would be like, I cannot give you this story because I am absolutely no officer is ready to confirm this has happened. Now I can run that story and get views and get other people angry, and or I cannot run news. And that's why on our first live that we did, which our first live went about 8-9 days after the violence began, and we said we did stories from Chirachandpur because our reporter was in Chirachandpur. We did not want to take stories that we thought had happened, because honestly, if we had started taking stories from that time, we would have been publishing that X number of women have been raped.
Right. So one of the points that our viewers are asking just now, and this has been reflected in the Editors Guild report. So it talks about some of the factual issues and factual errors that were there in the news reports, and talks about some of the stories that were ignored by the media in Imphal. And that's the question, one of the viewers is asking, why was the child who was burnt in an ambulance not really tried to, reported? And that's also one of the questions being asked by the Editors Guild, that you did not take that story, and that story should have, we also took that story, but after double checking, I think we checked about 5-6 times before putting that story out.
Because that's the thing, because again, and if you look at it, if the first time that story was reported, for example, was somebody who was doing ground reporting. So that's where
can I come in here?
Yeah.
See, I think and during that particular phase, I think in the very crucial moment, I think it was Amit who called me up once, I think, remember? Asking me, is it true or not, Then I said there are certain things that we need to exercise self-restraint, okay? Here self-restraint is kind of a editorial control that we exercise ourselves. And and even if it was true or false, I mean, doesn't matter. But for us at that level, it's not, at that level. I mean, in fact, we came a little late. I think Amit knows. We knew it. I mean, you were.
Yeah.
I mean, you knew earlier than
Yeah,
us.
exactly.
So we came a little late, and Amit in fact asked me. Amit in fact asked me, is it a kind of a worthwhile? Is it what kind of a story? I said, Amit, see the kind of situation right now. So we did a kind of self-censorship. I do agree with that, okay. But I don't know if the rest of other media followed that the kind of lines that we took. And nobody, I didn't get a call, or nobody ever stopped us from taking that. We had been very bold, as Amit says, in the kind of thing. And in fact, Amit called me up and I said, Amit, we are not doing that story because even if it is true, yeah. I think this is and it's not only that. There are a couple of other stories. I think
No, there are several stories like
there are
this.
several
That's what I'm
stories like that, which I think at that moment, you could have not helped, like ECI report. What is again? It's not helped anybody.
Yeah.
It has not helped anybody to
when you
bring
start
peace.
taking
Okay.
this one more thing that I'll just add here, that when you start taking examples, this happened in July, and Imphal media did not do that story. Nobody, even the Imphal media, will say that there has not been pressure. This is what I'm trying to explain, that the reporters are working through extreme levels of pressure.
And that's the argument Amit and I also have sometimes, because when our reporters from the ground say, Nagaland, Arunachal, Sikkim, they file certain reports, and some of them are genuinely scared for their safety.
Exactly.
So we have to take a call whether we take the byline or whether we are the ones who are going to execute that story, and leave our reporters who are on the ground directly, in
Not facing the line of
the
fire.
line of fire to get out, because that happens on a regular basis. It is very easy for people in our towns and villages who do not understand the role of the media in a democratic setup to just call up and threaten a young reporter, and a young journalist threatened at such a age when they are just learning about journalism. It shakes them up. It's not like you can. Therefore, we try
exactly.
to deflect calls to us as much as possible. You can call us and you can shout at us. You can tell us that we've been wrong, and we are willing to listen to you. We will listen to you. There have been people who have threatened us on social media, saying that, Karma, you are speaking for the cookies more than you are speaking. But we are not doing that. So that is what needs to be understood, and that is the line that should have been taken, maybe looked at or by the Editors Guild of India, in saying that journalists are under certain pressure. Now, none of this is there in that report. This chapter should have been there. What kind of pressures are local journalists working
Exactly.
under in Manipur, and why did they take a certain line? If the cookies reporters were left out, their stories were not taken, then a detailed report should have been there, that why. Just by saying that they couldn't write well, their stories did not come on time because there is no internet, all this is just not doing it for us, is what the editors here are saying. On that note, any last words from you, Doctor?
Yeah, a point that I think many have been saying is the words that we speak and the words that we write have consequences, and that we know in general, but particularly in a conflict situation, I think it becomes even more true. So if there is an irresponsible statement from a very well established organization like the Editors Guild of India comes out, that is going to have ramifications in Manipur. And I think this is an appeal that I'm making genuinely to not just the journalists, but also civil society organizations, intellectuals, whoever cares for Manipur, that when you speak, just keep in mind that people have been suffering. Just keep in mind that what you speak, should be for bringing about peace in Manipur, for laying a roadmap to reconciliation in the future. It should not be to bring sort of a partisanship in an already sort of divided society. So that's my appeal to people, and I wish senior journalists who are members of the fact-finding report had also kept this in mind, that what they wrote would have consequences in Manipur. And I'm not talking about the FIR which has been filed against them, but of how people on the ground would read this report and react. They're going to react very angrily, and then, as expected, another group may say that, oh, this is yet again, another sign of this community behaving in a particular manner, and so on and so forth. So it's actually, I'm sorry to use the word, it's in a way instigating more violence rather than bring about peace. So I appeal to everyone to be just mindful of what they say.
Yeah, and I think to add to what Dr. Jila had already mentioned, I think I absolutely agree with him. And number two, again, going back to the EGI, the Editor Guilds of India's report, I think, forget about the terms of reference and all the other things, but I think if you do a kind of a impassionate textual analysis of it, I think there's going to be lots of problem, into it. And I'm not, I mean, bringing in, that every fact-finding report should have something called a kind of research methodology kind of a approach. But please see it, the end results of the kind of a fact-finding report. But the last thing that I would want to say is with regard to this particular report by the Editors Guild of India, is that it was the intention is that they should have done a reportage or analysis of a reportage by the Imphal media. In that case, I would have absolutely agreed it, which basically means pick up 3 or 4 kind of a sample, maybe Shanghai Express, Imphal Free Press, or even some of the digital news outfits like you or us, do kind of a textual analysis not in the conventional research methodology. Then you said, okay, Imphal Free Press had reported this, and this is not true. I mean, kind of a, even, what you call cross-checking facts or so, like what is fake and what is not fake, so that it also does away with that kind of a binary, So if you do some kind of a content analysis in terms of thing, that would have served better result than this,
which is what I mean. I would like to add is that EGI could
they should have done a content analysis even without coming to Manipur, Manipur.
That's precisely why I think it almost triggered me, because instead of giving a very, very constructive direction to the violence and how to report it, you have merely added to the noise around it.
Yeah. Exactly.
You did not. We are no better off after the EGI report, and that is a sad thing. That is where I feel bad, because that you clearly interacted with Manipur journalists, and by Manipur journalists, I am talking about the all Manipur working journalists. You spoke to them, and you listened to them, or you at least acted like you listened to them. But instead of talking about the extreme, and I am being very selfish here, because I expect Editors Guild to speak for us, because nobody ever else speaks for us journalists. I expected them to speak for us. Instead of that, they just tried to show us that, oh, you know what, do better next time because you are not doing a good enough job. Right. That is unacceptable from my point.
So on that note, we've completely run out of time, and sadly, as the discussion line suggests, again it is broken. It's again become you against us or us against them. These discussions are to build bridges, to listen to each other, to understand a point of view. It's not about bringing one community or not bringing the other community, but to hear. So that's why we at EastMojo keep saying that you need to listen to all sides and represent everybody's voices. Sometimes it's difficult, and sometimes even when it's easy, most people don't do it. So the Editors Guild of India, a very important report which we were waiting for a long time, has come under severe criticism. Keep those comments coming. You can also write into us, editor@eastmojo.com, and remember, we are an independent media house and we'll need your support. Log on to eastmojo.com and please do support us by subscribing to our premium stories. Thank you so much for watching us.